The courtroom was already filled to capacity before the judge even entered. Spectators, press, and legal teams buzzed with tension as if they all knew history was about to be rewritten in real time. No one had expected this case to bring Tupac's name back into the federal spotlight, not in 2025, not after nearly 3 decades of silence, speculation, and unanswered questions. But here it was. A manila folder placed firmly on the prosecution's table, stamped unsealed in red ink, sat like a loaded weapon. The judge, an older woman with silver hair pulled into a tight bun, gave a slight nod. The lead prosecutor stood, her voice clear, no dramatics needed. "Your Honor," she said, "we move to introduce previously sealed testimony from a federal investigation conducted in 2002 regarding the murder of Tupac Shakur." You could feel the room freeze. Journalists' fingers hovered above keyboards. Every lawyer looked up, and seated just 3 feet from the prosecution was Sean Diddy, expression unreadable, in an expensive charcoal gray suit, his head tilted slightly but unmoving. "The information," the prosecutor continued, "was held under national security protocols due to ongoing surveillance operations at the time. That restriction has now been lifted." She placed a printed transcript on the projector. The screen behind her lit up. The jury squinted as a highlighted line appeared. The Las Vegas incident wasn't random. A second later, the words that had only ever lived in rumor spilled out loud into federal record. Puff said, "Handle it. I don't want to know how, just don't bring it back to my doorstep." There was no gasp, no explosion of shock, just absolute bone-deep silence because everyone understood the weight of what had just happened. This wasn't some YouTube rabbit hole or anonymous podcast theory. This was court-admitted testimony, now part of the federal record. The defense immediately stood. "Your Honor, hearsay. The informant is not here to be cross-examined. The statement is vague at best." The judge lifted one hand, calm but firm. "The document is part of a federally archived investigation. It is admissible as corroborating evidence. The jury will determine its weight." Just like that, one of the most persistent questions in hip-hop history became more than speculation. It became part of a case. The prosecution clicked to the next slide. A blurry, dark photograph appeared. Time stamped September 6, 1996, the night before Tupac was shot. Location, a private suite at the MGM Grand. It showed 3 figures. 2 were clearly identified: a bodyguard affiliated with death row records and a man long rumored to be operating under orders from Bad Boy's upper ranks. The 3rd figure stood barely visible in the background, facing away, exiting through a private hallway. The build, the haircut, it looked like Diddy. This time, there was a soft but audible ripple across the room. The jury leaned forward. A few scribbled notes. Still, Diddy didn't move. The prosecutor's voice remained steady. "We intend to show that not only was there prior knowledge of Mr. Shakur's location, but also deliberate distancing maintained by individuals who previously denied a presence in Las Vegas that weekend." She pointed to Diddy. "Our evidence will establish that Mr. Combs was in that hotel, that he made calls not traced to his name, that financial movements were made before and after the incident suggesting compensation. No one was hearing a story anymore. They were watching one unravel, thread by thread, and the man at the center of it all was sitting quietly, just feet away, with nowhere left to go." The following morning, the courtroom felt even heavier. The energy was charged, almost electric. The prosecution requested to bring forward their next witness. a retired Las Vegas Metro police detective, now in his 60s, hair gray, posture rigid, eyes still sharp. After being sworn in, the prosecutor stepped up. "Detective Foster, why were you pulled off the Tupac case 6 weeks after the shooting?" He inhaled deeply. "Because I asked the wrong questions." The room froze again. "I had a theory," he continued. "It didn't just involve rival gangs, it involved music executives. I submitted a request to follow a financial trail specifically, a wire transfer made 48 hours before Tupac was shot. The request was denied. Then I was reassigned. No explanation. What did the wire transfer suggest? It went from an entertainment firm in New York to an account in Nevada. The timing aligned with the appearance of a known shooter who was never arrested. My gut told me it wasn't coincidence." "Was Mr. Comey's linked to that firm?" "Publicly, no," Foster said. "But internally, their revenue source was listed as Bad Boy Licensing." One of the jurors began scribbling furiously. Diddy finally shifted in his seat, his jaw tightening ever so slightly. "Detective," the prosecutor asked, "did you ever receive pressure not to pursue this lead?" Foster gave a bitter smile. "Not directly, but I was told to focus on gang retaliation. When I didn't, I was pulled." "What do you believe now, almost 30 years later?" The detective didn't blink. "I believe the murder of Tupac Shakur wasn't chaos. It was coordinated, organized, and the people behind it knew how to make it look like chaos." The jury stayed locked in. Then the prosecution revealed something no one expected. An audio tape dated 1997 from an internal police debrief never before made public. The voice of a younger Foster came through. "One of the informants says Puffy knew Vegas was going down, that he pulled people out 12 hours before the hit. He made a call, 'Don't be near the strip, let 'em do what they gotta do.'" The defense erupted. "This is unofficial, speculative, unverified." But the judge held up a hand. "It is consistent with established testimony. The jury may consider it." The room didn't gasp anymore. They listened. They wrote. They believed. "If you had been allowed to follow your leads," the prosecutor asked, "what do you think you would have uncovered?" The detective looked at her, then the jury. "A chain, a straight line, and at the end of it, a man in a suit who thought he could buy silence forever." That line didn't make anyone flinch. It made them lean in. Because for the first time since 1996, the myth of coincidence was being replaced by a theory of design. And the man at the center of it, the one they all turned to look at next, was not blinking, not breathing, not speaking, because silence was no longer protection. It was evidence. The judge called a 10-minute recess. No one moved. The bailiff didn't have to tell anyone to stay seated. The reporters didn't check their phones. Even the stenographer sat still. Because in that moment, the courtroom wasn't just witnessing a trial. It was listening to ghosts who had waited 30 years to finally speak. The room had barely returned to normal when the judge re-entered and gave a simple nod. The court reconvened, but the energy hadn't dissipated. It had calcified into something denser, more electric. Every eye in the gallery returned to one man. Diddy sat stoic, chin slightly lifted, but now his stillness no longer looked like control. It looked like survival. The prosecution stood again, her tone calm but firm. "Your Honor, the state calls Miss Evelyn Carter to the stand." A woman in her early 50s walked into the courtroom. She wore a dark blue blouse, modest skirt, and a small cross necklace that rested just above her collarbone. Her steps were slow but steady. She didn't look around. She didn't need to. She was here for one reason. After being sworn in, she sat, folded her hands, and exhaled. "Miss Carter," the prosecutor began, "you were employed by Bad Boy Entertainment between 1995 and 1997, correct?" "Yes," she replied softly. "And what was your role during that period?" "I was Mr. Combs's travel coordinator and personal assistant." "Did you book travel for Mr. Combs on or around September 6, 1996? Evelyn nodded. "I did." "Where was he traveling to?" "Las Vegas." "Was that trip originally planned?" Her hands tightened slightly. "No, initially he wasn't going. Then very late on the 5th, he said he had to be there for visibility, but he didn't want his name attached to anything." "Is that unusual?" "Extremely. Sean Mr. Combs was always about being seen. Being visible was the brand. That night, he wanted to disappear." The silence that followed felt like it was breathing on its own. "Miss Carter," the prosecutor said carefully, "did you speak with Mr. Combs after Mr. Shakur was shot?" Evelyn paused, then nodded slowly. "He came back from Vegas. Quiet. Not the kind of quiet when he's thinking. The kind where he didn't want to be touched. He canceled interviews, turned down meetings, and then he said something I will never forget." She looked directly at the jury. He said, "Sometimes silence saves everything." A murmur rose, low and collective, like a wave building but refusing to crash. "Did Mr. Combs ever mention Tupac by name in the days that followed?" Evelyn swallowed but held her gaze. "Yes, we were flying back to New York. I was reviewing the upcoming schedule with him. He stopped me and said, 'Don't schedule anything Pac-related. He's not part of the narrative anymore.'" "Part of the narrative?" That's how he said it, like Tupac was a plot point in a film, like he'd been written out of the script. The jurors sat utterly still. The prosecutor tapped her remote, revealing a scanned internal memo dated September 4th, 1996. On it, Bad Boy Entertainment letterhead, Evelyn Carter's department. One section, circled in red ink, read, "Sean, to avoid Las Vegas Strip activity. Redirect to side entrances only." "Miss Carter, is this your memo?" "Yes." "Did you write this?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because he told me to." The defense stood. "Speculative. Motive cannot be inferred from a travel memo." The judge raised her hand. "The document is authentic. The jury may determine its intent." "Why did you keep this information all these years?" the prosecutor asked. Evelyn's voice cracked for the first time. "Because I signed NDAs. Because I had a career. Because I was scared. But when I saw this case open again, when I heard Tupac's name being spoken in court instead of whispered in alleyways, I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore." She turned not toward the prosecutor, not toward the judge, but directly toward Diddy Combs' side of the room. Her voice shook, but it didn't break. "You built your empire off silence, off fear. I was part of that. But I won't die with your secrets in my chest." The courtroom froze, as if it didn't dare interrupt something sacred. Even the court reporter hesitated for a fraction of a second. Because this wasn't just another piece of testimony, it was someone stepping out of the shadows after decades inside the machine. The prosecutor let the silence hang before continuing. "Your Honor, the state calls Mr. Daniel Greaves." A tall, lean man entered the courtroom. He wore a charcoal suit, modest tie, and carried a tightly secured messenger bag. He didn't scan the room. He looked straight ahead. His name had appeared on conspiracy boards, ignored by mainstream outlets, buried beneath whispers for years. Today, he was not a theorist. He was a witness. After being sworn in, the prosecutor approached. "Mr. Greaves, state your profession for the record." "Investigative journalist, formerly of The Source, then Rolling Stone, now Independent." "And how long have you been investigating the circumstances surrounding Mr. Shakur's death?" "Since 1997. I never stopped." She held up a folder. "Can you explain what's inside?" "It's a collection of documents, faxed wire transfers, recorded interviews, bank statements, internal memos, and a chat log from an encrypted messaging app. I compiled them from 1997 to 2006. Most of it was ignored or blocked by editors, until now." "And what do they show?" He glanced at the jury. A pattern. The murder wasn't random. It wasn't just gang-related. It was structured. It was industry political. And at the center, over and over, was Mr. Commies. Murmurs again. The prosecutor pulled out a wire transfer. "This document, $125,000 sent to a consultant in Las Vegas, 2 days before the shooting." She tapped a phone log. "This one? Call made from the bad boy office to a known bounty fixer, 22 minutes, masked through a forwarding service. And this transcript? A source from Diddy's own legal team in 2002, off record, said he was told to be invisible that weekend, told to keep 2 people away from Vegas to create deniability. Why did you keep going when everyone told you to stop?" Daniel exhaled. "Because the truth doesn't expire, not when someone's dead." "Mr. Greaves," she said, "is there any corroborating witness you worked with that hasn't yet appeared in court?" He nodded. "Yes, a hotel manager, retired, kept a security roster from that weekend. Gave it to me 2 years ago. It has names people affiliated with Bad Boy who shouldn't have been near the MGM Grand. 3 of those names matched your team's list. I sent it last month." She nodded. "Confirmed." Audible gasps. The defense tried to object. The judge silenced them. "Last question, Mr. Greaves. Why do you think no one believed you for almost 30 years? He paused. "Because the truth was expensive, and too many people were still making money off the lie." As he stepped down, the gallery didn't clap, but it felt like they had. The air shimmered not with victory, but with vindication. Because this wasn't just a cultural story anymore. This wasn't just hip-hop mythology. This was federal testimony. This was receipts. This was silence being dissected like evidence. And the man at the center of it all, Sean Diddy Combe, was no longer shielded by image, money, or legacy. He was just another man in a courtroom. And the ghosts, they weren't going away. They were just getting louder. The door to the courtroom opened again, but this time there were no whispers, no buzz of anticipation, just a creeping hush that spread like a slow ripple across the room. The next witness was escorted in under high security, no name announced, face partially obscured behind a privacy panel erected just off-center from the judge's bench. The jury leaned forward. Even the judge sat up straighter. This wasn't a celebrity or a journalist. This was confidential witness 54, a former bodyguard who had worked for both Death Row and Bad Boy during the peak of their volatile rivalry. He moved with practiced discipline, spine straight, eyes focused. But it wasn't his posture that drew the room in, it was his silence, the kind of quiet worn by someone who had seen everything and lived long enough to regret it. He raised his right hand and was sworn in. Then, settling into the chair, he didn't blink. He didn't fidget. He waited. The prosecutor stepped forward. "Sir, do you confirm that you served in security details for Mr. Shakur and Mr. Combs between 1995 and 1997? Yes. Do you recall the days leading up to September 7th, 1996? Vividly. Were there any conversations, direct or indirect, that suggested Mr. Combs was aware of a threat to Mr. Shakur? He didn't pause. Yes, there was a conversation on September 5th. Diddy was pacing in his suite. I was posted outside the door. A man arrived, clean suit, briefcase, no security, not from the industry. They talked inside for less than 10 minutes. I didn't catch the whole thing, but when the door cracked open, I heard one line. What was it? He looked straight at the jury. He said, "We'll need to get him to Vegas. The rest will be handled." A slow exhale moved across the courtroom. No one gasped. No one spoke. But everyone was thinking the same thing. This wasn't theory. This wasn't secondhand gossip. This was a man with a badge, a uniform, and now a conscience. Was Tupac's name mentioned directly? No. But the next day I heard another conversation. Diddy asked someone, "Has he confirmed his appearance at the Tyson fight?" They nodded. That's when Diddy smiled. It wasn't relief, it was certainty. The prosecutor let the words sink. "Are you suggesting Mr. Combs planned for Mr. Shakur to be at a known location during a time of risk?" "I'm not suggesting. I'm stating he knew where Pac would be. And too many people who never miss a Vegas fight were told to stay away that night." The defense rose immediately. "Speculative." The judge, without looking away from the witness, replied coldly, "This witness has first-hand experience. The jury will determine credibility." Were there any other phrases Mr. Combs used that implied indirect instruction? The bodyguard's jaw flexed. He had one phrase. He used it when he wanted something done without being connected to it. What phrase? "Make it clean. Make it disappear." Now the silence changed. It wasn't stunned, it was grim. The jury scribbled in unison. Someone in the press gallery whispered something unintelligible and was immediately shushed. Did he use that phrase before Las Vegas? Twice, once on September 5th, once again the morning of the 7th. Then came the question that reshaped the entire room. "Why are you coming forward now?" He took a breath for the first time since sitting down. "Because last year my son found an old VHS tape in my closet. From a party. Diddy, Suge, Pac, Biggie, all in the same room. My son asked me, 'Was this real?' I said yes. Then he asked, 'And now they're all gone?' I said yes again, and then he looked at me and asked, 'So what did you do?' His voice cracked, but only once. I realized the answer was nothing. I did nothing. I thought I was doing my job. I thought protecting the client was the mission. But I wasn't protecting him. I was protecting power. And I let silence be my paycheck." He looked back at Diddy Combe now, not with rage or hatred, but with something far heavier, accountability. "I can't let my kid grow up in that silence." The prosecutor nodded, letting the weight of the moment hover. No further questions. As he stepped down, the courtroom didn't just sit in silence, it sat in reckoning. The kind that only comes when someone admits they've been part of a lie for too long and finally decides to rip it open. But the prosecution wasn't done, not even close. When the court resumed after recess, a woman took the stand. Her name wasn't read. Her face wasn't visible. But her voice, clear, unwavering, cut through the air like truth with teeth. I worked in account reconciliation at Bad Boy Entertainment from 1996 to 1998. Do you recognize this invoice? The prosecutor asked, holding up a document. Yes, that's what made me leave. What was unusual about it? It was for $80,000, labeled as Event Security Conflict Mitigation Level 3. But the vendor was fake, the tax ID bounced, the address was a storage facility that had been abandoned. Did you report it? I did. And what were you told? To leave it alone unless I wanted to disappear too. Why are you here now? She inhaled, long and deliberate. Because I've watched the world turn this into a myth, a movie, a rap beef. But Tupac wasn't a myth. He was a man who was set up, and Diddy didn't pull the trigger, but he lit the fuse. That sentence changed the atmosphere of the courtroom. Before, the energy was reactive. Now, it was transformative. Because what was happening wasn't just legal. It was spiritual. It was cultural. It was historic. The prosecutor turned to the judge. Your Honor, the state requests to introduce one final element into today's record. A nod. A large screen was wheeled in and powered on. It played a recorded deposition. A woman in all white, seated calmly, her voice soft but resonant. My name is Afeni Shakur. Every inch of the room seemed to hold its breath. My son didn't die because he rapped too hard. He didn't die because of some random beef. My son was targeted. My son was hunted. And people in power made sure no one could speak. They made fear a currency. But fear only works when no one has the courage to speak back. She paused, then looked into the camera, straight into the future. Well, I'm speaking now, and I hope you're listening. A few people in the gallery wiped their eyes. Even the court reporter paused, her hands trembling slightly. The prosecutor closed the screen and turned to the jury. This is no longer about music. It's about justice, and justice has a long memory. She looked back at Diddy. You wore power like a crown, but power doesn't make you untouchable. It just makes you visible. And with that, the courtroom didn't exhale. It inhaled something new, truth. And it was no longer being whispered. It was being recorded under oath in a courtroom that wasn't just prosecuting a man. It was putting silence itself on trial. The courtroom lights dimmed slightly as the judge gave permission for the next piece of evidence to be presented, a digital hard drive retrieved from an old laptop once owned by a member of Diddy Combs' former legal team. It had been wiped years ago. But thanks to modern forensic data recovery, what had once been erased now came roaring back to life, and what it revealed turned a tense courtroom into a bomb waiting to detonate. The prosecutor stepped forward and inserted the drive into the court's secure projection system. The screen flickered, then loaded a folder titled Internal Communications, Sept. 1996. She opened the first message, an email dated September 7th, 1996, 3:12 a.m., barely 2 hours after Tupac had been shot. It read, The Vegas situation is resolved. Investor no longer in exposure zone. Funds will be transferred by Thursday. Cleaner confirms all is neutralized. There was no gasp this time. No scribbles of frantic notes, just stillness, like the room had collectively stopped breathing. Because this wasn't a rumor. This wasn't a second-hand whisper. This was a digital trail with timestamps. The prosecutor turned slowly to face the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said softly, "you've heard the term investor throughout this trial. Today, we show you it wasn't metaphor, it was code." She pulled up another file, a receipt. $75,000 withdrawn from an account linked to a company under Bad Boy Entertainment's licensing wing. Date, September 5th, 1996. Signature, authorized by a member of Diddy Combs' legal counsel. The dots were no longer scattered, they were forming a line, straight and damning. But the prosecution had one last move left for the day. "Your Honor," she said, "we would like to conclude today's testimony with a video deposition recorded prior to her passing." The screen flickered again. A small room, a white background, and sitting quietly in the center, wearing a simple white blouse, was Afeni Shakur. Her voice was soft, calm, and unforgettable. "My son didn't die because he was angry, or loud, or too political. My son died because he spoke the truth, and people who profit off lies feared that. They didn't want his truth in their empire." She looked into the camera, directly into the room itself, as if she were speaking across time. "They made him into an enemy, then a ghost, then a myth. But he wasn't a myth. He was my baby, my child. And the people who know what happened? They sat quiet. For money, for protection, for fear." She paused. "I've heard every excuse. I've watched every headline. And I'm telling you now, he didn't die by accident. He died because someone said, 'Make it disappear.'" The camera zoomed in slightly, framing her face. "And to the man who lit the match, I hope you're watching this, because this time, silence won't save you." When the video ended, no one moved. Even the defense sat rigid, unsure of how to react. The judge turned to the jury. "We will adjourn for the day. Deliberations will begin tomorrow." The gavel fell once, but the sound echoed like a shot. Diddy Comb sat frozen. His eyes were forward, but his mind was elsewhere, chasing back through 3 decades of perfectly managed narratives, media manipulation, legal protection, and fear-bought silence. But now, none of that could stop what had begun. The courtroom emptied slowly, not like a crowd leaving an event, but like a congregation exiting a place of revelation. Outside, the press cameras were already rolling. Hashtags were already trending. And inside, the courtroom air still hummed not from tension, but from truth finally being spoken aloud, clearly and in public record. For decades, the story had been twisted, blurred, buried under profit and myth. But now it had a face, a timestamp, a voice, and most importantly, it had witnesses. As the doors closed and the lights dimmed, Diddy Comb remained seated at the defense table, alone, surrounded by his legal team, but more isolated than ever, because legacy doesn't matter when truth walks into the room. And now, truth had a seat at the table, and it was not leaving quietly.